Okay, so welcome to Grief Chat with myself, Mark Lemon. For today's episode, I'm delighted to be speaking with two inspirational knife crime campaigners, Alison and Rachel Webb. I was just wondering whether you would be able to just give the viewers a bit of a background as to, why we're talking today and your own experience with grief, please. And that's to you, Alison, first.
Okay, so I lost my only son, Joshua, in 2013 to knife crime. He was stabbed once. Since his death, there was a huge outpouring of grief because of his status in the music industry, and it resulted in me having thousands of young people turn to me in their grief. So it's just been kind of a whirlwind since then of dealing with my own grief and picking up the pieces for many other people. So that's in brief my story.
Okay. And how about you, Rachel?
My journey began October 17th, 2017, when my second eldest son, Kyron, was stabbed in a knife attack in Manchester, where he sustained 2 stab wounds, one to the heart, one to the back, and he died 3 days later at the age of 15. I think my journey, it was a weird one, because I think having my first encounter of grief in that kind of situation and trying to come to terms and understand what I was going through, as well as trying to be a mum and mourn and grieve, but still be there to keep my children strong and to help them through the process. I think it kind of all rolled into one big ball, and then finding something to cope with, I started writing, and I think it then began in there because I started blogging, and then I wrote a book, and then I think from that people then started to gravitate towards me, and then I found that it then started where I was then supporting other families of murdered victims, and I think the journey began like that.
Yeah, I mean, both of you have been incredible with sharing your story, and not many people would be able to do that, and so the courage and the how inspiring it is that you've both gone on to do what you're doing, just to shine a light on this this problem, is fantastic. And I was just wondering how you found the last few years and what really inspired you to just want to share your story with so many people. And I'll go to you first, Rachel.
I think for me is when it first happened, I didn't have a foggiest idea what was going on, what to expect. I had so many unanswered questions and nobody seemed to have the answer for me. And I think when I first started writing, my main goal was to answer those unanswered questions that I had for every other mother that would have to go through the situation that I had gone through going forward. I think there was a lot of preconceived perceptions. So people assumed that I knew so much more than what I did. But my older 2 sons, they hadn't been involved in any sort of antisocial behaviour that we had known of. So I'd never had to go to police stations. I'd never had any dealings with law. I'd never had any dealings with police in my childhood. So anything I knew was based on what I had watched on Law and Order or what I'd seen on TV. And in real life, it doesn't play out like that at all. And that lack of preparation made the traumatic experience so much worse, because it was so much unknown. And so each hidden situation or hidden experience had just had such a tremendous impact on me. And I kind of wanted to share my story to shed light and to be able to answer some of those questions. So if anybody else found themselves in an unfortunate situation that I did, they kind of knew some answers. There was some, I could kind of take away some of that unknown and fill some of those gaps to, I don't even know, you can't really make the experience easier, but it gave a better understanding, and it gave a better understanding for parents that hadn't gone through what I had gone through, so they could be more proactive in putting in those practice strategies with their own young people to kind of prevent them falling victim to knife crime or becoming a perpetrator to knife crime.
Yeah. And how about you, Alison?
Yeah, mine was, very different, only because through my son's life and my own life, we'd both experienced a lot of trauma. So when Josh actually passed away and I was faced with thousands of young people and they were traumatized and they were grieving, there wasn't really time for me to look at my own grief and trauma. That was just put to one side because I had you know, they were just on self-destruct mode. And that's where it kind of started. I realised that if you had a connection with these young people, it was a very powerful tool to guide them away from making negative choices. So, you know, the choices around retaliation, their own personal emotions was very dangerous. And I realised that through my son's story and my own story, they understood that actually, even though something is so difficult and so painful, it does not mean there has to be a negative future. You can still turn it round. And then it goes from 1 week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And then before you know it, there you are, however many years down the line. And it's been 7 years with my son. And in the last 7 years, I've lost both my parents as well. So whenever I've come to try and face it, I'm just whacked with another, you know, pile of grief. So I just get on with it to the best of my ability. And I think that's just what you do in this situation.
But how does that make you feel, Alison? So not being able, because one things for me at the start of my journey, I came so resentful because people wouldn't allow me to just grieve. So they would say, you know, if I cried, stop crying, come and think about the children. If I felt weak, like I was going to fall, don't think like that. You've got to think of the children. When I was trying to say to people, I'm having suicidal thoughts, and I'm telling them that there was this voice just telling me in every action that I was doing naturally, there was finding a way that I could end my life just doing this little bit here. If I just, you know, and nobody let me, and I became so resentful. And as a mum, I resented the children that were alive because for me, they had become this stumbling block from stopping me from grieving or mourning or bereaving or whatever it was I was supposed to be feeling. So I ended up feeling that I was going completely mad. And in the end, for me, all I could do was drink because I had to just numb the voices in my head, numb that pain. And I didn't have any other outlet. So I then took a crutch.
I guess I wanted to move on to a few statistics, obviously, over the last year, and there's so much going on with the pandemic at the moment. And so the Office for National Statistics have reported that 6% increase in number of offences involving knives or sharp instruments up until year ending March 2020. And then they're also saying that the report states that the majority of these crimes have come from London, West Midlands and West Yorkshire. I'm just wondering what your take is on that. And also, you know, there's a spotlight shined on it and then it goes away, you know, and this is what we find, isn't it? Last year around sort of spring, there was this big push in the news and all of this stuff. And then it just goes away again, you know, and this conversation needs to keep going. And so, yeah, I'm just wondering what your take is on that.
It's devastating because just reading 2 days ago, 67% approximate decrease in youth services, and yet a huge increase in youth violence. Nobody has to go to university to study why that could possibly be happening. So in the pandemic, you've got young people desperately needing support, guidance, mentoring. They've got a real need to have, you know, people around them to give them positive messages and guide them moving forward. And that has been blocked because of we're not allowed to see them face to face. We haven't got access. And I think we're going to see a huge deterioration. We already are. Some of the shootings, the stabbings aren't even reaching the press, and it's becoming normal, which I'm not happy about. And a lot of people possibly will watch this, will see the headlines, and whether they like to admit it or not, somewhere in the back of their minds, they'll be like, well, they were probably a gang member, weren't they? They were probably dealing drugs. Perhaps they were from London, and woe betide, they're probably black, aren't they? Open up your eyes to realise that knife crime can walk straight through your door at any time, regardless of what's in your bank account, what car you drive, what the colour of your skin is. And until that is made priority by everybody, then yes, we are absolutely going to see an increase day in, day out, year in, year out. And then what will happen is somebody who will be seen as important, so not a young man on the street or a young lady, a 26-year-old lawyer, an MP's child, and then it'd be like, oh my God, shock horror, knife crime is coming to this country. And we will see another campaign that has no effect, and we will invest money in it, and then the following year we'll do the same. And that's just my, you know, what I've seen with my own eyes every single year since I lost my son.
Absolutely. And how about you,
also,
Rachel?
I feel that the biggest issues is they don't actually deal with the underlying factors that are causing youth violence, knife crime, the things that are actually causing this to rise. We don't address those. So people will say, oh, but you've got to look at, socioeconomic status, the opportunities that are out there for young people, different career progressions, interruptions within education, the disproportionate way certain groups of individuals are treated within society by police or, health and so forth. And at the end of the day, if we don't deal with those underlying core root factors, then you're never going to see the improvements that it is that we want to see. Secondly, you've got, as Alison said, there are so many small different organizations, grassroots organizations that are working towards knife crime, and they are probably making small ripple effect impact in the local communities that they are at, but people are still working in isolation. You've still got a lot of people with the savior complex because they want to be the ones that find the ultimate cure to reduce knife crime from happening on the streets, especially impacting our young people. For the young people that are out there, it's inevitable that we have just got a lot of undiagnosed mental health trauma walking in Nike tracksuits and trainers. If I, as the mum, who wasn't there at I wasn't at the point when he got stabbed, but yet I developed PTSD as what you would call secondary trauma. So for these young people that are on the street, that see their friends attacked and stabbed, that see that the friend dies in their arms, that sees the blood that's left on the road, that constantly hears about these things, it's inevitable that the impact of that trauma is what is going to lead to a mental health diagnosis. Yeah. So later on in life, they might come and say, oh, you've got bipolar, or you're under CAMS because you've got this issue and personality disorder. But we all know that that comes from trauma. So a lot of these mental health conditions that you're seeing throwing out there, the base of it and the root of it is trauma, but we are not addressing that trauma. Even as the bereaved family, I got a lot of support from victim support and so forth, but my extended family, so Kyron's cousins and people like that, they didn't get any support. They didn't get any help. They didn't have any any regulatory body contact them or offer any counselling or offer any support. And if you go to your GP, you're waiting years and years and years for any referral if you get one. By then, there's going to be a natural decline in their engagement, in their communication, the way they respond and engage with certain people. And then it was, as you said, Mark, on the media every single day. It became the norm. Every paper, every headline, everything was knife crime. That perpetuates a fear amongst those young people that so many of them will feel that, well, the only way to keep myself safe is to carry. Whether they want to use it or not, they think that this is the way to keep themselves safe. If they brandish the knife, it gives them that little split second to be able to run away or deter somebody from attacking them. And it's really hard. I did a training not long ago, and they were saying that before there's a front cortex, a bit of your brain that doesn't develop in children until they get to about 25 years old, and that's the part of the brain that you use to rationalize, to problem solve, and to do all these different things. So as grown adults, we've already got that. So we look at the situation and we say, well, it should be addressed by doing this, and we all take a logical approach to it. But if for these children, they don't have that part of the brain to help them to rationalize this, problem solve, and see alternative options, but nobody sees the wider impact because they're being suspended from school. If they do something wrong, they're being put into isolation. What you call reflective practices, oh, you threw that pencil at the child, let's not do that again. We got to say sorry, and that's it. But nobody's really addressing that trauma. We have got fear, dysfunction, hurt, pain, and disassociated tendencies just developing within the natural personalities of these young people. And the COVID thing, putting people in lockdown, it's another form of isolation, isn't it? It's another form of breaking it away. So in one essence, at the beginning, I was quite angry because I thought, well, why has the government made all these massive changes because of Corona, and we've got lockdown, we've got this, but when everybody was crying out about our young people's blood pouring out on the streets, nobody could do anything about it. But now we've done this massive wave, and it took me a while I was angry, and I was really bitter at the start because I just didn't understand why the government had all this power all of a sudden, but never had the power before. And I agree with you, Alison. Every year since Kyron died, it's got significantly worse. Prior to Kyron's death, I didn't actually know any person that had been stabbed and died, but I knew of many. Since Kyron's death, my friends have lost children.
Yeah.
It's a constant
I think
thing.
once you hear of someone, it becomes. But one thing I just want to say, what you said, Rachel, about the young people experience trauma on the street, and I was asked, Mark, why I do what I do. How did it start? If you imagine, I had crowd control outside my house. I had queues of different young people, and I remember I was in my bedroom and it was monitored. We had the room where if they were literally covered in blood, fighting, self-harming, drunk, they'd come straight to me. If they could wait, they'll be in another queue. Now, I remember thinking, why is it that I am having to deal with this? Where is the support, the services, youth services, counsellors? So I'm ringing my GP, Childline, all these different organisations, and they were just like, go to your GP. It's not me. I've got a child in front of me who's paralytic drunk at the age of 13, crying for my child. What do I do? They'll have to go to their own GP. And I just thought, no way. And it was only through, and I don't know how, through me putting on the things I did, keeping these, it was like my arms were wrapped around them, but it was my arms wrapped around 1,000 children through an activity like go-karting, a ball, a football match. And you see all these families doing these things, it's because the support isn't there, and you need to contain this emotion of these young people, because they will go on to develop all the things that Rachel said. And, if you were to go to a GP at the age of 14, what you're going to wait 18 months, 12 months?
Even longer.
Or even longer, depending on where it is and what you say. And that's not one child, there's thousands of them. But if the money was invested to support young people at this stage, the money that would be saved at that stage would be millions and millions of pounds.
This is it. We're too reactive.
Yeah. No, all of those points were incredible. And I just want to touch very briefly on that whole trauma element of children. And obviously we're talking about grief, and I'm very passionate about supporting children with grief at a young age. But also, like you say, there are so many young people out there who are experiencing trauma. And where does that trauma go?
Exactly.
And I kind of liken it to the whole sort of obesity campaigns that have happened over the last couple of years, and the same thing should be with mental health in young people and children with trauma, because if the government aren't doing anything about this, where's it going to go? And later on, we're going to have adults who are wandering the streets, like we've just talked about, causing mayhem and struggling, and that's wrong. And I just want to briefly talk about your own experience with grief through the pandemic, and maybe if you've got any tips to anyone out there that might be struggling at the moment, as to how you might deal with your own grief, and that's to you, Rachel.
I think my outlet has been my writing. So through the pandemic, I wrote a significant amount. I've had to get to a point where I created my own platform of truth, and I had to be honest with my own life, my experiences, how I saw things, how I felt, and the different processes that I was going through. So it had to get to a point where I could be just open, honest, and transparent. And I tried to do that with the audiences that started to follow me on social media. And through the blogging, I wrote poetry, sometimes verse, but mainly poetry, and I would just express how I was feeling, and I would show that vulnerability. And I realized that I couldn't be I couldn't do it on my own. So I needed to create a bubble of support. So I've got a close-knit group of friends, and we've got our own sort of group chat on WhatsApp, so I'm able to go to and converse when I need to. There are times when I have to shut off social media completely, because it can be too much. As Alison said, it becomes norm, and you just constantly will hear so much, until it gets to the point where when somebody else hears of another fatality, they will then contact to share. So I have to shut that off for my own emotional perseverance. And it is mainly that. It is about talking, and it's the hardest thing for people to do, is to be able to really talk and show your vulnerability and just be real when you think, I can't cope, because then it gives people that opportunity to do that. And as I said to you, Mark, which you know already, your book, the Magical Woods, my youngest son, he won't speak at all. He won't say what's going on. Everybody in the family is really worried about him. I went to a parents' evening, and they said to me, he's such a good, quiet young boy, but he's too quiet, it's worrying. And when he reads your book and he goes through it, I find that it always triggers a conversation. So there's a narrative where he will then mention Kyron's name, and he might mention something that Kyron likes, or for a bit afterwards, there could be something I'm doing and say, Kyron would do this if he was it, and then it closes in again. And so sometimes it's getting those little things that work and just revisiting those things that work sometimes. And if it is just to get your book out and read your book with them again and sort of go through a narrative of what that means or how they feel, it's like that. But I find like it's going to be 3 years, October 20th. And as soon as I hit October, I struggle. I find it really hard. It doesn't matter how I try to be positive and keep moving. I find that emotionally, I'm hard. I'm more easily frustrated. Things can get to me quite quickly. I can feel so more overwhelmed than normal. And the only way that I can find to get through is to keep speaking and to keep talking and to keep sharing. And sometimes speaking with other parents that have been through what myself and Alison have been through, because then they're able to give you comfort, but they use words that really penetrate, words that really have that emotion and understanding, because they truly know what you're going through, what you're experiencing, and their pain is different to my pain, but they have a greater understanding. And even if there are times when you just can't speak, they just seem to know the hidden language in that silence.
Now, they sound like amazing tips. Alison, how about you?
For me, I still take one day at a time. I see what today brings. I try not to look too far in the future, because grief, you can be bouncing along like a little happy kangaroo, and then it's like bang.
Yeah.
And that's why I try not to think too far, because I don't want to think, right, okay, this is how it's going to be now. It was the anniversary of losing Josh 2 weeks ago, and absolutely the week before you start feeling yourself, and you cannot control it. So when I'm in my darkest moments, it then goes to an hour at a time. I have to get through this hour, and I use the skills that I did right at the beginning. I needed to find something that I enjoyed, and I'm not talking about going out and painting or writing, which I know Rachel does. What for me, it was literally having a cup of coffee and sitting there and feeling that moment. And is this moment okay? Okay, so that's a 3-minute moment that's okay. It's still in me. I'm still able to find that moment. So I've just got to get through this hour, then another one, then another one, until you're back in that stronger moment, until the next adventure that wipes you out. But for me, it's just I've got to keep going day by day. And it is absolutely exhausting. I focus a lot of my time and energy into my work, future plans, things I've got, going on for young people. And that's all I can do. And I think people, when they're grieving, they say to me, what do you say to someone? That we all are different. You can Google grieving, does not mean that is how you grieve.
Exactly.
Just because somebody's saying you need counselling, you do what you need to do, and you do it in the way that you need to do it. And if you are not doing textbook grieving and going through processes, then you are still doing an amazing job. You are still standing. And even if you're standing, but you happen to be lying on the floor sobbing, you're still standing. And do not look, and I'm not saying don't listen to other people, but don't feel bad if you're not going through the process that is
someone
expected of you, because you are still doing amazingly well. If your day consists of sobbing on the sofa, then well done that you are here, and you're going to wake up tomorrow and face another day. So please don't.
And it's so good to cry, isn't it? You have to cry. Holding back those tears is the most crushing feeling in the world. You have to cry whenever you need to as well. And don't let anyone tell you that you need to be quiet. You cry. Have someone there to support you, but when you need to release.
And for those that are dealing with anybody that's grieving, we know that you mean the best when you say things like time's a healer, but when you've lost your child, time is not a healer. What you do is the only thing that time is, gives you the ability to learn how to cope with living in pain and excruciating pain. You don't wake up 6 years later and go, Josh is dead. oh, I've got over that. That's time's healed it. It's okay now. Time to, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, doesn't heal. It just gives you the ability to understand the process. So, you know, in the first 3 years when it was coming up to his birthday or anniversary, it'd be like, but now I think, well, I know I'm going to fall apart 3 days before, spend the day in bed 1 day before, and on the day, I'll just be so sad. But then I also know 2 days after that, I'm like, ding, off we go again.
Yeah.
You learn your own grief process as you go along.
I always say that grief is like a coat that you put on. On some days, you know, it might be a bit hotter and you might need to wear it a bit heavier, but then on others it could be a bit lighter, and that's okay. You know, like you said, like you both said, grief is individual, and we all deal with it in our own way and in our own time, you know, and it just becomes easier to bear as time moves on. Like you said, Alison, you know.
I think Alison's best point was, this is truth, is you look at other people and think, well, how come they're at this point, or they're able to do this and we can't? And it's, you just don't realize that that's just a face you saw today, or that might be something you see on social media. And for some of us, especially for myself in the beginning, it is a bit of a charade, because it's what you have to do to get through. And I fell victim to that. I looked at parents that had lost children around the same time as Kyron, and I thought, well, how is it that they're able to go out, and how is it that they're doing this, or they look this good, and then it made me feel like so much more of a failure, and then it made me feel worse in my own emotional state. So Alison, I think that was a really, really valid point.
No, they're both fantastic points, guys. And look, unfortunately, we've got to end it here. And it's been an amazing conversation. And I know that people out there that are watching this will get a lot out of this, because it's an incredibly important conversation that we need to continue, you know. And it's not something that we shine a spotlight on with the media and then it's got, you know, and it's gone. It's something we need to keep talking about, because like we said, it's a wider issue. It's an issue that if we don't support the young people out there, then we are going to have lots of people out there with mental health problems. And but I just want to say a big thank you for the work that you both do. And yeah, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And nice to see you, Rachel.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.